Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unseen Work. It's another Wednesday, a wonderful Wednesday, and I'm excited to have you guys all here today. So, reminder, this is meant to be an interactive experience. So, as you are watching this, be sure to leave a comment. It'll look like this. The duck could be you. Bring your comment, bring your question, and you could be a part of the live stream and not just sit there and take, right? Don't be a taker. Let's give something back. A couple of the housekeeping things. This is my Instagram handle. I love it if you'd follow me on Instagram. That'd be cool. Lots of other cool content over there. You can also go to milesbiggs.com. That's where you can watch the TED Talk about unseen work and check out the book as well. So there are my shameless plugs. Tonight, I'm really excited for our guest. If you remember last week, we had a last minute cancellation due to the awesome COVID vaccine. Like, I couldn't be more happy to have someone cancel because everybody get vaccinated, right? Let's get this thing back up and going. So Nick was feeling a little under the weather, but he's back this week, which is awesome. So it is Nick Mann. And if you've wondered, what is this thing over my shoulder? There's those big block quotes, and yes, that is my name under it. Nick designed that. He's got a whole company called Tyypo Prints, where he is the founder and the designer. He also is a podcast host. He hosts the Don't Quit podcast, which I've been on. You can check that out if you want to listen to more of me for some reason. And we're going to talk to Nick all about that, how he got here. Those are the things we see him for. We're going to dig into all that unseen work that brought us the wonderful Nick Mann. So here he is. Thanks for joining us, Nick.
Yes, thank you for having me, Miles. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah. So what is your take on it, right? Like, give me your elevator pitch. I just said founder and designer of Tyypo Prints. I'm pointing over my shoulder, but how would you describe your company, the podcast? Let's set the stage for that, like what you're seen for, like I always say.
Yeah, the Don't Quit podcast started as just myself, actually, and still do like to do these solo episodes of me just talking about my own productivity and motivation problems and being able to see how other people are able to relate to them. But it wasn't until about 4 months ago that I've had guests on and able to share their own stories about their own perseverance, their productivity and motivation tips of where they got where they are today. And they're from anywhere from CEOs to nonprofit leaders to athletes, musicians. This is a whole array of different lifestyles and choices that we make in our lives.
That's awesome. So what, so many people think about starting a podcast.
Yeah.
Right. But you did it. You took the plunge. You showed up. It's hard to do it when it's just you too.
Yeah.
So, but you've been doing it. So what made you want to get into the podcast game?
So the reason being is that it was also it was a tie into Tyypo Prints, which is motivational art prints, and how I'm able to showcase my own motivation productivity to be able to place into that. So, and a lot of it is just to improve myself. That's how it originally started with. It was just to myself and about myself. I didn't even care who would listen to it. So I do believe that you kind of have to figure out your why for when you're starting your podcast and realizing that it's not always about trying to figure out the numbers, thinking about all these grand scale messages. About it's really just be yourself and how whatever you want to say out to the world, even if it's just to yourself. And that's just how I started with and how I was able to progress from that. Because, you know, when you're starting out as a podcast, it can be pretty daunting when you're talking to a dark abyss.
Yeah, it feels that way, doesn't it? Right? Just like I look at a wall. So it's literally like you're talking to the wall when I do it. And then you wonder, like, will anybody listen? Does anybody care? But I think you're right that if your motivation is it's for you, and you make, I say this all the time, I'm selfish when it comes to my content creation. Like even this, I was excited all day. Like I get to have this conversation. I love chatting with people about these kind of topics.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's it. That's why I do it. I don't need to be famous or make a bunch of money. It's like, I walk away from all these conversations feeling enriched, feeling like I've leveled up in some way. Right. So I think that's the best place to come at it from.
Yeah, from when I was having guests on, I realized like there's just so fascinating and ways to answer even problems on my own, especially with life coaches. Like, wow, there's so many great ones. It's so overwhelming how many good ones are out there. And it wasn't even so much about like whoever would listen, like I was getting so much great information just for myself that's what just keeps me going. It's just so much about that. It's just like there's so many stories that leave me speechless, and it's just like, wow, to be able to showcase that, and like this, that in itself is just really extraordinary, and we're always worth continuing.
So I'll ask you a question I get all the time when it comes to the podcast. People are always curious how I get guests, right? Like you mentioned CEOs, all these like people that are like movers and shakers, high-powered folks. How do you approach them? How do you get them on your podcast? What is that unseen process like?
The funny thing is that I'm not necessarily the first one that approaches them. I actually get them from referrals of other people.
Nice.
Yeah, and everyone knows someone. So that's why it's always just be able to say, hey, reach out like, hey, I realized that you were really awesome on my show, and I also want to have other awesome people about that. So, awesome people know other awesome people. So like, and you try to figure out like what kind of guests that you want to have on your show. And I talk about like whatever it is the people want. And especially like my favorites are the nonprofit leaders. I think they're some of the greatest people in the world, and I think they need to be heard as much as possible. So that's always like one of the ones I always try to target with. And as luck would have it, everyone knows someone. So that's really the biggest one, is just get referrals, and people love sharing their stories and realizing that, hey, that person's really cool and I had a great time with them, so they're willing to share with.
That's awesome. I'm literally typing that line from you right now, that awesome people know other awesome people. I love that. It's a good reminder.
Yeah. It's kind of what I learned from like freelancing. Like bad clients know other bad clients. Good clients know other good clients. So that's how I always try to figure out.
There you go. So so freelancing. So how, let's sit on that for a minute. You mentioned that. So is that how Tyypo Prints started? You were freelance graphic design for other people and you decided, let's do it for me?
So Tyypo Prints started as a way to get around my biggest problems as a freelancer, and that was sales. Not to say I was bad at sales. I just hated doing it. It felt like such a grind. It was my least favorite part of it, and it's like the core essential part of it. So it's like, if this feels so difficult. And the reason why I love Tyypo Prints is that it gets away from the sales, puts more into the marketing aspect. And that's what my strongest point is. So that's the reason why I'm able to venture out into that area and excel more. Yeah. Even though I, could still continue to do it if I enjoyed it, but like, why trug through something that you just not passionate about when you can do something that you are?
Sure. Yeah. Play to your strengths, right? Instead of trying to make your weaknesses stronger, make your strengths stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. Why, it's like, why make things harder for yourself than it needs to be?
Yeah. All that. Again, what do you think it is about you that makes you do these things that are not typical, right? Most people wouldn't start a business to solve a problem, right? Like you said,
yeah,
wanted to solve a freelance problem by starting a company.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just due to my area. It's just like there's not a whole lot of opportunities that are just there for you. So that's the reason why you have to create your own. So that's just why I just always thought about like while I'm progressing with my career about what is it that I want to do. Like I want to design, if I could design prints all day and every day, I'll totally do that. But there's not a whole lot of jobs that just do that. So that's kind of a reason why, if you want to have the best job you want, you have to create yourself. So
another Nick Mannism right there. I like that. Awesome people know awesome people, and if you want the best job, you got to create it yourself. So is this typical of your family? Like one of my shticks here, right, is generational unseen work. The idea that we either choose to do what our parents did and kind of perpetuate what came before us, or do you look at it and say, I don't want to do what they did, I want to do something else? So would you say you are like or unlike the rest of your family with what you're doing?
I'm unlike all my family. They have never started a business before. So
why do you think that is? Do you think you consciously said, I want to forge a new path, or how did that come to pass?
See, I just don't really feel like I just had the same opportunities presented to me as it was for them, to where they could have a 9-to-5 job and able to excel in that. Like the longest I've had a 9 to 5 job for was 3 months.
Wow.
So yeah, I know.
And so what? You're like, I know that's short. Why,
I know.
why is that? You didn't like it. It wasn't a fit. So what, like you said, why do something you don't like?
See, the thing about it is, man, I wish I had more power, and realizing that it's just a lot of people that just don't really either fit with me, or a lot of unforeseen circumstances that just go beyond anything I could have done.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think like those are the most frustrating, because I can analyze the past and try to figure out what I can do next or the future, and realize that there was nothing I could have done. I think that could have been like, that was definitely a frustrating part about, but I've learned to accept that as well, because I realized like you cannot control the past. You cannot control what you cannot control.
Right.
So that's what I love about Tyypo Prints. That's what I love about my podcasting, is like, now I do have a sense of like, here's what went wrong and here's how I can improve, and realizing that, hey, I can actually forge my future based on this, and not have unforeseen circumstance instantly change everything that I've been doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like control is a big thing for you. Which is real. A lot of people, again, say that they want that, but then aren't willing to do what it takes to make that a reality. And you're just doing that left and right here. You're taking ownership and not making excuses. You're taking action.
It does help that I don't have any alternatives. So that's kind of like one of the biggest driving forces of all this too.
Yeah. So meaning like, for you feel like the 9 to 5 thing's not an option for you. So
yeah, it feels like it's
all in.
Even though some could say this is a confirmation bias, but I really believe that's a cycle that will never break.
Yeah.
If I continue that path.
Sure. So where, like going back to how all this fits together. So you're freelancing, you'd love to design prints all day, every day, and not, not just have your life turned upside down by an employer, right, that you can't control. What got you into the whole motivation theme? Like, I know your whole thing is turning dreamers into doers through your motivational prints. You've got the Don't Quit podcast, documenting your own, motivation, productivity. Like what set you off on that niche of productivity and motivation?
Largely is just because I was bad at it as a student, and realized that if I want to make something good for my business, I need to be able to control that aspect of my life. And it was just, not only was it fascinating to learn about it through books, podcasts, blog posts, but also the fact that it's just also good for you, about how you can also apply it to your life, and realizing that like, I'm actually like, it's all just coming together, and how I'm combining with my love of graphic design. That's how I've got my degree in. And I'm just like piecing all the things that I love the most together, realizing that, just creating all my passions into one area.
Yeah. I love that. So you say all your interests, and you got your degree in graphic design. Another type of unseen work I talk about all the time is passive unseen work. The idea that unrelated things come together sort of in the background of your life and passively compound into something new. So you got the graphic design degree, you got freelancing you've mentioned. What do you think are some other experiences you've had that, as you sit where you are now and you've done everything you've done, you can look back and see how what maybe seems like it didn't relate totally, like the dots connected, the stars align, and it's gotten you where you are today?
Yeah, so a lot of that is being able to figure out the passives of like, what are your strengths in. That's all why I've been going forward in my life, is my own creativity, my own passion, interests, of realizing that there's different ways to be able to accomplish something. So that's why it's always just so important to know about, like, when there's a will, there's a way. It's a very cliche quote, but I'm definitely much a part of it. That's also one thing I really love to do with Tyypo Prints, is I don't like to go with the most obvious quotes, just because they've all been done before. It feels like everyone's heard them, and it kind of gets boring after a while. That's why I always like to try to be a little more one more creative or original, or even just based on some quotes that I've just heard from other people before, not necessarily just like super well-known people.
Right. Yeah, like the one I got on the other side about from Nelson Mandela, right? About it always seems impossible until it's done. That's everywhere. Everybody's got a version of that.
Yep, I believe I have one of his quotes up.
Nice.
I'm telling you.
So what's the process then? I'm curious about this. So I'm going to pull up your site. And this is obvious. This is the one that's behind me on the wall. I have the white frame version of the black. So I was one of those little known quotes, right? You turned into a print. But if we're looking at this, and this one's fairly simple. I can pull up a more elaborate one, but I'm curious what the process is. Like, this is the end product. What are the steps that you take to reach something like this?
Yeah, so a lot of it is being able to design about the overall feel of what the quote is supposed to represent, and being able to show other types of creativity about, I never tried to do the same thing twice. So that definitely helps me be able to figure out where are some things that like, oh, I haven't done this before, and how does this align to overall feeling. Some of them are more whimsical, so they would use more brighter colors, so use a script-based font, be able to use more imagery that are more, fits with the whimsical, such as like flowers or birds, maybe environment. And then we got some, like your quotes are very strong, they're very sturdy, they make you feel powerful. So that's why I'm trying to think like, what are things that people associate with that kind of sturdiness? And a lot of it is not only is the quote blocks, but also, that's some of the more whimsical fonts that I've tried to use in corporate that would be used in a, such as a living room for a whole family, or for children, or however people want to do for like a nursery home, however based on how they feel with that print. That's the thing about it, is how much fun I have. I always try to do, different things. So like whoever can coordinate with themselves in it. So you can see like, wow, that's so awesome. I want to have that. So, you gotta have designs that's in your house or your office that you just feel proud about. So to go back to your print, so I wanted to feel that sturdiness. So like the texture behind the text block is of a concrete wall. So that's kind of like the strength that I feel from your quote.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't realize that. Look at that. The unseen of the unseen print. Well, that's cool. Sorry, I can look at it on my screen, but I'm looking at the actual thing. I like it. So we got some comments here. This is Tara Lurch. Hello, Tara. Tara is also of the creative tilt, Nick. She's a photographer. And so she's curious how you reach your potential clients. So we've talked about this a little bit with the podcast, right? You sort of ask and get referrals. But
referrals is always
what about with the prints? Any like collaborations, how you ask, or freelancing, how do you get clients? Any insights you can give, Tara?
Yeah. Well, for what's definitely been helping me with my own podcast, being able to talk with people and then realize like, hey, we get along greatly. And then I could just ask them like, hey, would you like to do a collab of some sort? Because, try to, it's all about, the thing about what collabing is, even though there could always be just such a networking analytics process about it, but I also feel like it's just about connecting with great people that you enjoy working with, that you want to help support. Because I don't look at it as a way to be able to always just boost the bottom line. I just look at how to help great people become greater. So that's just kind of like the biggest thing about when I see identified with the people that I want to collab with. Is like, how well do I get along with them? Are they really awesome? Did he make me, did he make me feel better? Did he make others feel better? So that's kind of like, that's always the first thing I actually look for.
Yeah, you just touched on like a little known mindset, I think, about podcasting that people don't give it enough credit for, but like as a business development tool. I've talked about this with people often. It's like you could have the podcast as a standalone thing. But like when I work with brands and companies and help them start podcasts, that's one thing I talk about is you can interview your employees, you can interview your current clients, but think about somebody that you have not been able to get a sales meeting with. Reach out to them, give them a compliment, right? And say, you're an expert in XYZ. I'd love to get you on the show to talk about it. I don't know if we don't do business together, but you still think would bring value to my listeners. And like you said earlier, people love talking about themselves, right?
Yeah, they do.
Get them on, you build that relationship, you see if there's a vibe, and then you can follow up after you've provided them the value, and it's an easier sales thing. So I think that's a good point you made. I agree with you. I'm backing you up on that.
Yeah, you even touched on that aspect of like support what is it they're doing. Like if they're creating content, if they're making whatever a small product is, it's like, what are ways that you can also just support that? And then be able to follow up with, hey, whatever service or product that you do that can help them. Because, that's the thing about it, is a lot of people don't want to see you as always a taker. So that's why it's a give and take relationships. Just try to think of what are the most win-win situations in giving and taking that you can do without, feeling like you have to take away so much of yourself.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes strength, right? Like that's an easy thing to say, Nick. That's hard for most people, right? So how have you cultivated that? Does that come from trial and error, figuring that out, or sounds like there's probably a story there?
I just feel like, how is it that you would like to be approached by someone? Do you just like to be like absolutely out of the blue? Here it is, and just one email and just hope it goes. Like, I don't think if like 90% of the time that's never worked out for me. Whenever I got an email about that, so like, why should that work for others?
Sure.
So. Yeah, that's why I always try to think about what are things that make you feel better about yourself if someone did something to you, and try to think of, hey, what's ways I could do that to others as well. So that's kind of the thing I'm just trying to base myself on, is just how to make others feel better about themselves. How can I help them out with their overall mission, what they're trying to do?
Love that.
Mm-hmm.
So failure, Nick. I'm sure it's happened, right? It happens to all of us. I'd love to hear about a time where you flopped, you're face down in that mud puddle of life, and you failed, you lied, you obsessed about it, you pretend, right? True failure, you didn't learn anything really from it. You couldn't flip it and make it work for you. It just didn't work out in the moment. And I'm sure you've learned from it now, but what's an example in your business and the podcast? What's a flop?
Yeah. One is trying to being so passionate about so many different things and trying to do so many at once. That's always one of my biggest struggles. And it feels like I can really do a lot of different things, but realizing that not all of it is worth pursuing.
Sure.
With Tyypo Prints, I've actually had a lot of different other print products besides just prints. Actually, it was a lot of apparel. I even had like t-shirts. There was also hoodies, hats. It was a lot, actually. The more I think about it, I was like, man, I was diving way too much into so many different print like products, and I realized like, wow, people just know me for prints, and it just feels so overwhelming for them. And it's also overwhelming for me to be able to handle this all. So I just realized like, let's just scale back and just focus what I'm good at.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. I find myself same thing. I get excited by the shiny new toy, the shiny new idea, and then all of a sudden you realize you're doing a whole bunch of things not good, not well. And if you scaled it back and focused in, you can be more effective on that one thing.
Yeah, and my life became so much better about that, because that's actually with such a clarity, and that's one of the most important words like any coach will tell you, is to be able to focus on clarity. And that's so much about just focusing on, what you're passionate about, what's your main goal, and what you're good at, and what makes you happy, and not try to focus on so much trying to do so many other things at once. Will even go as far as to say clarity is probably like one of the top 5 most important things like anyone should ever focus on their lives. That health, wealth, and relationships. No one ever talks about clarity in that area, and that needs to stop, because clarity is like the foundation of all those sections.
Sure. Yeah, you got to get clear on what it is you're trying to do. Like, sure, you want to be healthy, you want to have wealth, you want to have great relationships, but why? For what? What's the end goal, right? Get clear on that, and it's amazing what else falls into place.
Yes, yeah. That's why I'm just such a big component about that, and why it feels so freeing to be able to focus on only one aspect of the business that you do so well, and you're able to prosper so much more. And just trying to juggle everything so much just by yourself, and realizing that you just can't do it all. It's not, not everything needs to exist.
Sure. It's true, right? Just because you had the idea and you think it's cool doesn't mean you got to go all in.
Yeah.
So what about a flip? What about a time you failed, but you learned from it? You improvised and then you pivoted and executed on that new thing?
Man, that's a lot of the different ways about how I go about design process. What makes people like about my prints, and realizing that there's also there's like some weird there's correlations between some prints that I put in like 5 days work that does a lot better than a print that I would do only like half a day of work on it. There's also a lot of prints that I think that like I'm not a fan of, but I'm realizing that it actually does super well, and I can't believe it does because I'm not a fan of it.
Sure.
But
That's interesting.
I know it is always interesting because I do so many different styles, and so many different types of people love different aspects of the prints I try to do, and realizing that it's not always about me. So it's not always what I enjoy about it. So like there's a lot, there's a lot of whimsical prints that I do. I'm actually a lot of people say I'm really good at style. I actually do believe so as well. It's just like I would never purchase those prints myself because they just don't really appeal to me. They wouldn't look great in my overall landscape of what I have with my office. So even though I'm just really good at that style, it doesn't necessarily fit me personally. And that's how it is with everyone else. And that's also I can go off the tangent. That's the reason why selling art can be hard, because everyone has an opinion on it, regardless of what they have on it. So
yeah,
it can be such a struggle.
That's true. Man, it's true about anybody who creates anything, right? Like even what we're doing right now, people are gonna have an opinion about this conversation we're having, and we're putting it out there. So we're inviting that opinion, right? Which it can be hard sometimes because we don't always agree with that opinion. Or like you said, I'll do a podcast and feel like that was the worst interview performance I ever had, and then it like skyrockets in downloads or something, right?
I know.
It is funny how it works.
It's funny. My most successful podcast was the one I thought I did the worst in too. It is funny. It is funny how that works.
Yeah, and I always feel like, in a way, people sense that, like I don't know, it's like, oh, they had an off day, and they identify with that more than like a completely polished performance, right? It's like it feels like an actual human, not like a performer, to use that word. I don't know. I'm guessing now.
No, but I think it's a guess that does the great job.
Yeah. So something I'm exploring is like an idea, is what I'm calling point C. So I'm asking a lot of people about this, just get some outside perspectives, right? This is where I'm doing this for me. This is my selfish content moment, like we were talking about. So for me, put this in context for you, I was working really, really hard for 1.5 years to get from point A to point B. Point A was starting to write a TED Talk and starting to write the book. Point B was publishing and delivering those, right? Like it was done. I was so focused on getting from point A to point B. When I got to point B, I looked up and was like, oh shit, right? I actually did it. I reached point B, kind of felt like it would never get here, but now it's here and I have no idea what to do next. What is my point C? Right? So curious, somebody like you've done a lot. You seem to throw yourself in and just create things to solve problems that you have. Have you felt this? Have you been at a point B, like your pinnacle, and then realized, what do I do next? And had to find your way back to something that made sense? And then how did you do that?
Man, my process about where is it at? I guess I could say that's how it kind of started with the podcast, where it was just myself until I started to take the jump into having guests on. And that was pretty scary for me because there was a lot of unknowns. Because when you're dealing with another person inside of something that you're doing, you cultivated for quite a few years, like it can definitely throw a wrench in what the perceived notion of how other people see it, how you see it, and where you see it going forward. And there's just a lot of unknowns. I think that's one of the biggest aspects that a lot of people are also most fearful about any kind of business related things, is that there's a lot of unknowns, when it comes to the future. A lot of people will feel like where do I go from here, or what happens to worst case scenario? And it's just a lot of racing ideas. And to realize that a lot of the worst case scenarios that I was always thinking about having a podcast guest never happened. Or when it did one happen, it actually wasn't that big of a deal. And realized that was just my own mental barrier of assuming the absolute worst of something that's going to happen, and it never actually does. And realized I was just making things harder for myself for no reason.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I've been there. I feel like most people watching and listening have been there too.
Yeah.
So on that though, like, so point B for you was doing the podcast for a few years. Like you did it. You had a successful podcast, and now you're transitioning from point B to point C, adding guests. How did you navigate that process? And like, as you reflect back on it, anything you did that you felt was super helpful, or you wish you'd done differently?
Well, I'll definitely say what helpful is definitely having you. I know, like, because one thing about it is I've learned from, other people like you with your podcast about like, how is your process? What do you do? And try to figure out like how can I emulate something that works? And that's a thing about it is being able to, always, you definitely helped me out, and I'm definitely thankful for that. So it's like, I think people can definitely learn to definitely reach out for help for people that inspired you, or even people who are not doing well, but also not like super successful, but for people who are just like a few steps ahead of you as well. It doesn't have to be at the top of the mountain people, right? Because, like they probably don't have enough time to be able to talk to you. But there's always a lot of people who are just ahead of you that will absolutely willing to.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying my name. Actually, sort of forgot that we had that. As you said, I'm like, what is he talking about? But then I remember we did have a phone call where you're like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this.
Yeah. What is and that's why you were
doing it solo versus doing a guest. And I just shared with you my thoughts.
Yeah, you were my first guest, and I was so happy about that.
Yeah. Well, I think you make a great point about what you said earlier about awesome people and other awesome people.
Yeah.
But also just ask for help and to find somebody who is already doing that thing you want to do. Yep. And approaching them and asking them for help. And then that's where your awesome people and other awesome people thing, right? Because then you could say, hey, thanks so much for helping me. Who else should I talk to? And then that person might be like, oh, you got to talk to Bob, right? Bob's awesome. Go talk to him. And then Bob says Jim and so on.
I know. There's actually a plan. I know. I've been getting referrals so many from people in the state of Iowa. It's like I know so many people from there. I've never been in Iowa. I'm still in the West Coast of
That's so funny. That happened to me with Minnesota. I interviewed like 7 or 8 people from Minneapolis that I eventually I flew to Minneapolis just to meet everybody.
I know, that's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm thinking about for Iowa.
You should. That was a great experience. I loved that. Like this kind of virtual connection, actually seeing them in person was really cool. And again, like the power of podcasting, right? And you can make these connections and grow as a person and actually create a network and real relationships where you can fly across the country and know a whole pocket of people. It's really neat.
Yeah, it's also incredible how many people are like have places that they're willing to stay. Like I even have someone in France that was like, hey, you want to stop by? I have a place you can stay. I was like, oh, that's cool.
Hey, I take them up on that once travel restrictions let you do that. Right?
I know.
That's awesome. Well, Nick, I've really appreciated your time here tonight. This has been fun for me. You gave me a lot of really great perspectives, which I appreciate. I'm sure the listeners appreciate too. So thank you.
Yeah. Hey, it's awesome. I love sharing my story. Love talking with you, Miles.
And everybody watching, you can see the ticker on the bottom of the screen. If you're listening back to this on the podcast, you can listen to me tell you, be sure to follow Nick. You can check him out on Instagram. It's at Tyypo Prints, and that's TYYPO Prints. You can also go to tyypoprints.com or search for the Don't Quit podcast wherever your pods are cast. So thank you all for tuning in for another episode of Unseen Work, where we remind you that you have to do the unseen work so that when you are seen, you have something to show for it. We will see you next time.
All right.